As part of Financial Planning World's Best Practice Financial Planning series, I'm excited to offer you our second video on estate planning. Focus today will really be our process as well as the death and dying part of estate planning. As a practitioner over the last 30 years, it's my strong opinion that a financial plan that's really thorough needs to have an estate plan component. However, it's also realistic that when clients come to us, typically their main concern is areas like retirement planning, investment planning. Very few people ever come to us and say, my main concern is estate planning. However, what we try to do is through the process that we're working together, in ongoing service review meetings, we'll add a topic that's just categorized as financial planning, and then a subtopic to be estate planning. And it's our intention there to have some discussion around their concerns, around their experiences, around their motivation level. And more often than not, the first time that we bring that up, their motivation level is low. So what we'll simply do is in our contact e-notes section under estate planning, we'll simply write the date of when we talk to them and what their lack of motivation was around and when we should actually try to follow back up with them, and then any other relevant notes. Ultimately, what we do find is that this takes several interactions before we find that their motivation to deal with it. Something typically has to be a life experience that happens, whether or not they have a parent die or a friend becomes incapacitated and they really realize. And a lot of times we'll work with someone for over a decade and then it's that they've retired and now they're really starting to come to grips with the reality that, hey, you know, I'm retired now, the next stage of life will end in death. So when they are motivated, the next step in our process is one of education, where we'll have a meeting. Typically that meeting is a one-hour session. And our purpose really, again, is understanding their experiences, their concerns, and then education. So in an education process, it might sound something like this. Mr. and Mrs. Client, it's really important to us that when we're completed with your estate plan, that you understand it, that it helps you deal with the things that are really important to you, and it deals with areas of incapacitation and death. And so since our video today is focused on death, I'm going to then focus the conversation just on that part. We'll go in and explain key words and phrases that they've heard. They have more often than not misinformation, misunderstanding in it. And so the conversation will go like this. If something happens to you, John, and you pass away and Mary's still alive, what do you want to have happen? And who will be in charge to make sure that happens? More often than not, John, what I see is as long as Mary's capable, she handles it. But there are times where there are extenuating circumstances where you want someone to come alongside Mary and take care of stuff with her. We'll have that kind of discussion. I'll ask them what happened, how did it work when your parents died, those kinds of things. Then I'll look over to Mary. Mary, when you pass away, I typically like to do ladies last instead of ladies first when we're having these meetings. But when you pass away, or in this context, when the second of you passes away, what do you want to have happen to your assets? And who do you want to be in charge to make sure that it happens that way? So we have these kind of candid conversations. I then go in and explain phrases like, say, for example, probate. And Mr. and Mrs. Client, most people have heard the word probate before, but they really don't know what it means. And the probate system really is there to determine who the owner of an asset is when the rightful owner dies and they haven't designated who that next owner is through some form of registration. There's ways to avoid probate, and it's desirable to do that because it's cumbersome and expensive. My experience when I'm talking with lawyers is they'll always say our state's a little different, it's easier and it's cheaper, but anytime I've had a client that had to deal with probate, none of them thought it was easy or cheap. The other things that we'll talk about is a will, and what are instances where a will makes sense. What's a trust? What kind of trust? Revocable, irrevocable? What are the key things that people need from a trust? Where does a trust make sense? Where doesn't it make sense? And we'll also talk about how a trust can be inside of a will as a testamentary trust. We'll talk about how a trust can be revocable or irrevocable, and then if you want your children to inherit via a trust, do you want it to be outright disbursements? Do you want it to be based on different things like different ages? Or do you want it to stay in trust perpetuity so that it's protected from things like divorce, creditors, in a way that adds another layer? Lastly, we'll talk about beneficiaries, both primary and secondary beneficiaries, who they want that to be. And after this meeting, what we'll really do is evaluate, are they clear enough on what they want? More often than not, they are. And then we'll recommend that their next meeting is with an estate planning lawyer. Some of our clients will already have someone that they're working with, most do not, and then we'll recommend someone that they ought to use. If a client is in a situation where they're one of our larger clients, we'll shepherd that process through with the lawyer. We do have to realize that there's time constraints, so there's some clients that we can't, and we just refer in hope that they actually get that done. And you have to remember that your heirs and omission insurance does not cover you in this area, so getting involved in helping them draft powers of attorney, healthcare, wills, all that stuff, I would highly recommend that you don't do that. And again, it's no big surprise that those we shepherd through the process, many more of them get it done. When an estate plan is completed, we have the attorney send us copies of the trust, the wills, any necessary documents that will come into play at a future point. We also make sure that the client gets everything funded. If they do a trust, but then they don't get it funded, it really is not best utilization of the thousands of dollars that they spent on the documents. Again, we'll summarize in our e-notes section what they've done. We also have a separate folder that's just on estate planning that we'll store those documents in. We'll have a separate Word document inside of that folder that will take fairly extensive notes around who's involved, why, ongoing discussions that we have. It's been my experience that these documents need to be revisited every 3 to 5 years. So when we revisit it, we'll update our notes on that. So in summary, the estate planning process needs to cover both incapacitation as well as death. It's important that you help your clients get motivated around this, realizing you can't lead a horse to water and make them drink, but you can bring it up periodically. Benefit to you for doing this: when 2000 and 2008 type of financial crises occur and clients get hurt financially, they're less likely to fire you due to performance if you've been involved in their estate planning and a lot of other areas of their financial life. So it really does help you put your arms around the client in a way that deepens the relationship, that helps you during difficult times to retain that relationship. If you're interested in these types of best practice learnings, visit financialplanningworld.com. We have a variety of different categories in financial planning, as well as best practices, industry trends. I would encourage you to watch those. If you're the type of financial advisor that really takes financial planning serious and wants to pursue excellence, both in financial planning, in business operations, and life in general, I would encourage you to learn about joining our community. Again, you can visit financialplanningworld.com. You can schedule an appointment with me, low pressure, high information relationship to see whether or not there's a fit. And lastly, if you'd like to be updated when we do these types of videos, connect with us, Financial Planning World, on LinkedIn, and then you'll be notified each time we do that. I'd like to thank you for your time and encourage you to enjoy the journey of excellence. Signing off from Financial Planning World.